The words whistleblower and leaked documents have been in the news lately. Republican Congressman Jim Jordan claims that whistleblowers will finally crack the Hunter Biden case, whatever that even is. A former CIA whistleblower is back in the news with scandalous information about Rudy Giuliani. A whistleblower is an individual who discloses private or secret information that may serve the public good. The information generally reveals illicit or even illegal actions by either the state or a private corporation. A whistleblower has access to this information because of their employment or association with the entity. Most disclosures of classified documents come from a place of concern, such as revealing corporate malfeasance or government overreach. That is what a true whistleblower is doing. They take what they do seriously, and because of this, we only know about so many of them because so few of them were ever caught. Newspapers such as the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and a myriad of others have public statements that direct leakers on the exact method in which to do this, at least for their respective publications. Often when you hear about anonymous sources, secret documents, and the like, you are seeing the end result of a leak. While researching the book Whistleblowing Toward a New Theory, author Kate Kenny interviewed a number of whistleblowers. She said, "All had a strong commitment to their cause and were incredibly brave in coping with retaliation that was sometimes brutal. I often felt in awe when listening to their stories, doubtful of whether in the same situation I would have had the same resolve. However, they were not all good in that saintly, heroic mode that we see portrayed in Hollywood films, but were, like us all, a mixture of dark and light, hope and bitterness, stoic with moments of weakness. Does that sound like something you can handle?" Leaking to the press requires some technological know-how in order to stay anonymous. But there is also some basic practical advice you need to know too, more about how to handle this socially and how to assess risk. When you read a newspaper, magazine, or article about important issues and the term anonymous sources pops up, that means somebody leaked the information or was contacted by a journalist first. People desperate to cover up their wrongdoing always claim that anonymous sources are suspicious, but in truth, this is standard operating procedure. Second, consider the information that you are leaking. If only you and, say, 2 other people would know this information, or even have access to this information, then your employer will be able to narrow it down to you and 2 other employees. One or both of them might have an alibi, and you won't. Case closed, you're fired. Practice what you will say if your employer suddenly questions you. Don't get caught off guard. Assume that people will be questioned and that you might be a suspect. Work on your poker face. Put yourself in the shoes of your employer. Would you be able to figure out who leaked the information? Then so will your employer, because even if your employer is not too bright, this employer will probably employ someone who can figure it out. If this is information that dozens of people could know or access, then some of this may not apply to your situation. It's important to note that if only a few people know the information that you're leaking, but you have invented an alibi and covered your tracks, the suspicion alone might still linger even after the investigation concludes and you still have a job. Be prepared to get side-eye from coworkers who may not trust you. If your information is a matter of national security, far greater precautions will have to be taken, because now you're up against the federal government. Professor Caton Mistry, in her book Whistleblowing Nation, said of this, "There is a central paradox to national security whistleblowing. It is a phenomenon widely recognized, yet systemically denied. In public and civic discourse, whistleblowing is treated as a central feature of democracy, a remedy to the ills of excessive government secrecy, corruption, and abuses of power. Whistleblowers are often enshrined in the tradition of civil disobedience, heroes acting for the greater good. The government, meanwhile, unequivocally rejects this premise and insists that any public revelation of national security information is an unauthorized disclosure that threatens the security of the nation. The legal and legislative framework stem from the executive position, shaping the norms and discourses within the state. National security whistleblowing is not officially recognized, but is nonetheless invoked as an existential threat." So, okay, you have some very important information, possibly the kind of information that could get you in trouble with the federal government, and dozens, if not hundreds of people have access to that information through computers at work. What's your first step? In the movies, there is a common scene of a whistleblower calling a newspaper, and then another newspaper, and then another newspaper to see if anyone is interested in the story, usually with either total failure or with the last newspaper on the list saying that they're willing to listen. This is not normally how a whistleblower initially contacts the media. Newspapers, TV channels, and press organizations have detailed instructions on their websites about how to give them a tip or how to give them documents. Media outlets are eager to receive your tips, documents, and inside information because big splashy articles that originate on their website or newspaper helps drive traffic. It is possible that some outlets, particularly smaller outlets or local outlets, will be nervous about exposure or upsetting local authorities and businesses, but most major media outlets are desperate for scoops in the age of 1001 choices for news. According to Philip DeSalvo, author of Digital Whistleblowing Platforms in Journalism, generally, whistleblowers provide information that can be published in the form of journalistic stories and investigations and are, in fact, the trigger to start the reporting work. In this sense, the relationship between journalists and whistleblowers is a complementary one, as whistleblowers need journalists to gain publicity for the information they provide, and journalists need whistleblowers to supply them with useful hints and otherwise inaccessible information. Before doing anything else, choose a media outlet, because each one has a different method for contact. Choose the one that makes the most sense. In your case, N seems to have the most security. Some are email only. Some use more secure methods such as Signal or SecureBox, and some may even suggest using normal mail through the post office. You may not be comfortable doing that. The Society of Professional Journalists has a list of outlets that have detailed instructions on how to contact them anonymously. Link in the description. First, don't look at any of these websites at work. Tying a whistleblower to a news story can be as simple as your employer looking at who goes to that news website on their work computer, who has access to the data, and cross-referencing to narrow down the search. Sometimes that search can be narrowed down to one person, you. Many of these outlets use Signal, Dropbox, or SecureBox. Don't look at them on your work computer either. Go somewhere with public Wi-Fi and download the appropriate apps. If you can, buy a new device to do all of this. Nothing can be traced back to your regular laptop or phone. Don't connect your new device to anything you normally do on your regular device, such as common apps. Email alone is not the safest way to leak documents, especially if the leak borders on illegality. An internet service provider or email provider will probably cooperate with law enforcement if they ask for your data. Also, it is not beneath law enforcement to try to find a way inside with or without permission. Unfortunately, some media outlets, especially local news stations, do not have instructions for using SecureBox to reach their journalists. The National Public Radio website only has an email address instead of detailed encryption information, like so many other outlets. Some websites for media outlets don't even have a page about this at all, requiring potential leakers to simply find an email address and hope they reached the right journalist. Of course, this might leave them a little vulnerable. If email is the only option or the preferred option by the outlet, there are still ways to protect yourself. Don't use your personal email address. NSA translator Reality Winner was caught leaking documents due to mistakes on both sides of the arrangement. The intercept accidentally revealed that the documents had been printed, leading investigators to narrow down their search. Winner was caught because she used her personal email account to contact the intercept. Don't use your personal email account. Protect yourself from mistakes on your end, and protect yourself in case the media outlet you choose makes mistakes themselves. From your device, which is hopefully a new device just for this, turn on encryption or download an app that offers encryption. If you use an encryption app on your everyday device or computer, do not log into that account. If an app needs an email address for verification, use a new email address. Get a free account from a trusted email like ProtonMail and use the Tor browser to access the email account. If you need to use the post office of all things, buy your envelopes and other supplies at grocery stores or department stores. Make sure your fingerprints are not on the envelope. Do not write a return address and drop the envelope in a mailbox in a different town. Post offices track from where the mail is sent. If you went through all this trouble so far, you can handle a short road trip. After considering all the angles and weighing the positives and negatives, it's possible that you might have second thoughts. For one thing, there is risk. Although most confidential sources are never discovered, every so often someone with a world-shaking piece of information like Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden will be found out. Manning was imprisoned and Snowden fled the country. Even if you take every precaution, there is always a slim chance of discovery. Also, even if your actions are not criminal, they could still create negative consequences in your life, such as loss of your job. For another thing, you may be wrestling with your conscience. You may have bought into the idea that dishonesty, no matter the circumstances, is always wrong. There are several problems with that. First, promises within power imbalances are always made under some level of duress. You have an antagonistic relationship with these institutions, even in instances in which these institutions benefit you, because they benefit you through compliance, not trust. Second, we have no moral obligation to cooperate with wrongdoing. In fact, we may actually have more obligations to act than not act. As explained in The Ethics of Whistleblowing by Eric R. Boot. On the classic view of responsibility for harm, my own actions ought to be sufficient condition for the harm in question. This view poses clear problems for individual responsibility for collective wrongdoing, i.e., wrongdoing for which, by definition, no one agent is exhaustively responsible. This is not merely a theoretical shortcoming. A significant part of contemporary wrongdoing is the product of collective action, often mediated by institutions. But if we are only responsible for the wrongdoing we bring about ourselves as individual agents, the result would appear to be that no one is responsible for the wrongdoing we collectively cause, thus leaving some of the greatest wrongs without assignable culprits. If we are to avoid this conclusion, we will need to take recourse to theories of moral complicity. Whistleblowing is necessary simply by looking through modern history and seeing what we might not have learned if not for whistleblowers, from Watergate to the NSA spy apparatus. You're probably doing the right thing. Just don't get caught.